After passing unexpectedly in September of '07, the late NTU President John Berthoud was described as the happy warrior of fiscal conservatism. To ensure that John's commitment to improving public policy lives on, NTU and NTUF created the Happy Warrior for Taxpayer Freedom Award. This award is given to an individual guided by the principles of limited government and free enterprise, a person who fights against higher taxes with more the sense of optimism that serves to inspire others to do the same, often against long odds. Last year, we presented the first award to Bridget Wagner, the Heritage Foundation, who's with us today, and we're very pleased to have Bridget here. Thank you. And this year, we are very pleased to present the award to Steve Moore, who everyone in this room knows is a real fighter for the taxpayer. Works as a senior economics writer for the Wall Street Journal. He's a commentator on CNBC, on Fox News. You see him on TV all the time talking about warning against the growth of government and fighting for taxpayers. If you know Steve, you also know that he epitomizes the happy warrior. He speaks out with a sense of optimism, pointing out the troubles, but he also talks about solutions to those problems. And I can't think of anyone more deserving of this award this year than Steve Moore. Steve.
Thank you so much, Duane, and to all the people at NTU, Dave Stanley and Ken, thanks so much for your nice comments. And you know, I hadn't realized that this was inspired by John Berthoud, who was such a good friend, and so it means a lot to me to receive this. We all miss John. He was a happy warrior. Lately, I haven't been feeling so happy about what's going on, but I am very honored to receive this award, so thank you so much to NTU. The only other time I've actually won an award in my life was a couple of years ago. I was awarded by Daily Cost the Villain of the Month award. So that's too much. I want to just say a few words about what we're facing right now. I do think that the barbarians are at the gates right now. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my 30 years. Ken described it very well about what we are up against. But on all fronts, we're seeing the left really make assault on liberty in every area that we can think of: healthcare, energy, taxation, debt. And I thought I'd never see anything like this in my lifetime. The amount of money that we have borrowed in just the last 6 months, under, unfortunately, the end of the Bush administration, and now in the first 3 or 4 months of the Obama administration. By my calculations, when you take into account the amount of money that's been borrowed by the Federal Reserve Bank as well as the Federal Treasury, we're at over $3 trillion. So we have borrowed more money in the last 6 months than we borrowed in the previous 30 years of our country. I call this fiscal child abuse, and I think Ken, you put it very well, and Dave, you did too. That the people who will be paying these bills will be our children and grandchildren, and unfortunately our great-grandchildren and their children, given the amounts of debts that we run up. I think about when I first came to Washington, and let's see, it was 1986, 1987, I was working with the Reagan administration in the budget office, and something very interesting happened back then, something we weren't very proud of back then. In I think it was 1986, we passed the first $1 trillion budget in American history. And as I said, as Reaganites, we weren't very proud of that. And I remember very vividly that working with Jim Miller at the budget office at that time, it was NBC News called for the Today Show, and they wanted somebody from the Reagan administration to come on and describe the new budget that the president was coming out with on Monday. This call came in on a Friday. And so Jim was not available, and he asked me if I could do this, and it was the first time I had ever been on national TV, so I was very nervous about it. And, so I spent the entire weekend studying the budget. And the federal, you all know the federal budget is about 3 inches thick. It's like the Manhattan phone book. And I crammed like it was final exam weekend. I knew every budget number in that document. I knew what the budget was for the federal, for the Department of Agriculture, for the Peace Corps, for the Department of Army, whatever question that Katie could possibly ask me, I was ready for. And so I go to the studio, the lights come on, Katie Couric sitting next to me, and she says to me, Mr. Moore, I see that President Reagan has introduced the first $1 trillion budget in American history. She said, I only have one question for you. How many zeros are there in a trillion? And, I have to tell you, I just melted down. By the way, how many zeros are there in a trillion? 12 zeros. These numbers are so unfathomable. I think one of our problems is we've all become kind of desensitized to how big these numbers are. We just passed a budget a few weeks ago in Washington that will borrow $9.5 trillion over the next 10 years. And so these numbers are the most enormous debt that we put on the backs of our children and grandchildren in history. And we know that this will be eventually paid for by higher taxes. And I think the Heritage Foundation did some analysis that suggests that if we were to pay for all of this spending with taxes, that it would, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but something like $150,000 to $200,000 of taxes per family over their lifetimes just to pay for what we've done in the last 6 months. So these are enormous burdens, and it's in every area. But I will say this, and this is the reason, Duane, that I'm so I'm turning optimistic about our current situation. First of all, I was at, how many of you either attended or organized one of those tea parties around the country? It's almost everybody in this room, and you are the people who are responsible for this happening. I want to salute you for what you did, because I think that was one of the turning points. I really believe that. And I attended 3 or 4 of these, and it was just so amazing to see the range of people that came to these kinds of things. I mean, there was this idea, the left kind of ridiculed these things about how dare people protest now? I mean, after all, Barack Obama's president. What do people have to get angry about it? In fact, what was the name, John, of this, was it CNN reporter?
Susan Rosgen.
Yeah, she said, what are people so angry about? Why are they so angry about taxes? Don't they know that Barack Obama is going to give them a $400 tax credit or something like that? I mean, I think the left really didn't understand the degree of anger and what the anger was directed at. I really believe this was not a tax revolt in the traditional sense. It wasn't like Proposition 13 where people were just upset about how much they're paying. Of course, everyone is. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. I think what the people that I talked to, they believe that everything that we're doing in Washington is just wrong and unfair. And so they were angry about the bailouts, about the debt, about the coming cap and trade system and energy. All of this stuff has led to a kind of boiling point. And the point I would like to get across to you all, because you are the warriors on the front line of these battles all over the states, is that when you had those tea parties, not only did Washington hear you like a sonic boom, and believe me, they heard you, but much, much more importantly, they are afraid of you. And I think that's much more important than them to be afraid of you. Let me make the final couple of points about kind of what we are up against. If you look at what has happened with the amount of money that has been printed, because we all ask ourselves, how are we going to possibly pay for all of this spending that has been done? How are we going to pay for the bailouts? How are we going to pay for the $800 billion stimulus? How are we going to pay for this $9 trillion budget? Nobody really has a very good answer for that, but I will tell you some things that are going on that are suggesting that all this spending isn't quite the free lunch that the left thinks it is. First of all, if you look at what's happened in the U.S. economy over just the last 6 weeks, look at what's happened to the federal Treasury bill rate on the 10-year Treasuries. Most of you in this room probably know this, but over just the last 6 weeks, interest rates have risen by 150 basis points at 10-year Treasuries. That's a pretty scary thing. And what it suggests is that all of this deficit spending is being paid for in one way through higher interest rates. Now, when you talk about an economic recovery, which all of us want to see, and all of us want to see as soon as possible, it's going to be very difficult for an economic recovery, one that's actually robust, that leads to more jobs and more growth. It's going to be very difficult for that recovery to take place in an environment of rising interest rates, right? Because what caused this crisis in the first place, or the trigger point, was clearly the mortgage meltdown and all the subprime loans and all of the excess housing that's out there right now. Now think about how we're going to get rid of all this surplus inventory of housing, how people are going to have the money to buy the housing if interest rates are rising up month after month after month, which is what's going to happen as a result of the spending, and it's happening right now. The second thing that's happening is look at what's happened to the reduction in the value of the dollar. And this is something that we at the Journal have been writing about week after week after week, but it's really important. And a lot of people kind of, the eyes glaze over when we talk about the value of the dollar, but my hero, and Ken's hero, and Duane's hero, Ronald Reagan, used to put it very well. If you want an economic recovery, if you want economic strength, the dollar has to be as good as gold. Remember the Gipper used to say that all the time, make the dollar as good as gold. And that happened under Reagan and under Bush and even under Clinton. What's happened subsequently is that the dollar has completely tumbled. And so we've seen about a 30% decline in the value of the dollar in the last 6 months relative to other currencies. That's a big deal to see that kind of destruction of our currency. And the point I've always made over and over again is there's no country in the history of the world that has ever gotten rich by debasing its currency, which is what's happening right now. Then look at what's happening to the gold price, look at what's happening to the price of oil and other commodities. Oil went over $70 a barrel again this week, suggesting that people are getting out of dollars and they're getting into gold, they're getting into commodities, they're getting out into any other kind of currency or any other kind of commodity rather than buying the dollar bill and holding on to the dollar bill. So this is a very frightening thing. Now, if you look at what's happened to money creation over the course of the last 20 to 30 years, it's an interesting picture. Many of you probably saw the piece by Arthur Laffer, who I wrote this book with, The End of Prosperity, earlier this year. If you look at what happened to money creation, and by the way, money creation is just a form, isn't it, David, of taxation? When I was doing an interview out here, somebody was asking me, do I think that the Federal Reserve Bank needs more oversight and more accountability? Hell yes. Hell yes, the Federal Reserve needs more accountability. I mean, when you think about it, we have put more power into this agency than any other agency of government. And yet, who in this room elected Ben Bernanke? None of us did. This is the ultimate form, Ken, in my opinion, of taxation without representation, the power that we've given to the Fed. In any case, so if you look at this chart, and if you want to look at the piece that Art Laffer wrote in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was in the paper on Tuesday or Wednesday, you have a fairly moderate rate of growth of the money supply over the last 25 years at about 8 to 10%, so the money supply can is growing at about the rate of the economy. And then what happened in October and November of 2008, and it's continued through today, the line goes like this, straight up. We've increased the supply of money by 108% over the course of the last 3 months. Or to put that differently, we have printed more money in the last 3 months than we did in the last 50 years. That's a pretty scary story, isn't it? What it means is that I have a friend who works at the Treasury Department who was telling me only half kiddingly, because I was asking about this. He's in charge of monetary policy here. He said, Steve, we are printing money 24/7 here at the Treasury. He said, the only thing that can slow us down is if we run out of ink. And he was only half joking when he said that. So what is the consequence of all this money? We all know what the consequence is: inflation. And I'm really worried about what's happening to the direction of all of that. But the other reason that I feel optimistic about where we're headed is not just because of what you all have done, and I think it is so important that you all are fighting, but also what happened in the elections. And how many of you followed what happened in the elections this past weekend in Europe? If you didn't follow it, it's an amazing story. I think, John, it's one of the biggest stories that didn't get covered almost anywhere in the U.S. press. I mean, even in our own newspaper, a small article about this. But this was another sonic boom, and it suggests that the kind of anger that I was talking about that you all have done so well in reflecting through your membership has transcended our national border. And now we're seeing this kind of anger that's spilled over into even European countries. I mean, even the land of socialism is turning against socialism. And so you saw a massive revolt in these countries with hundreds of millions of people voting. And they voted, who did they vote out? They voted out big labor and big green and socialist parties. And that was a big deal. There is something wrong with this picture that at the same time, the United States is moving towards socialism, these other countries are moving away from it. But I happen to think what's happened is that these European countries in Britain, they're about 3 or 5 years ahead of us. They've done cap and trade, they've done the high tax rates, they've got the obese welfare states, they've got the socialized Medicare system, and they're now seeing the bankruptcy of those systems. We should look to see what happened in Europe before we act and imitate their policies. So I think that's a very happy sign too, Duane, that we see that. Didn't you say there are people? There's somebody from like Mongolia here.
Yeah, one from Denmark. It was lower there.
Okay, Denmark. And so where's the gentleman from Denmark? Is he in this room? Is it true you guys cut your taxes in Denmark?
Yes, next year we will reduce the top marginal tax rate from 63% to 56%.
All right, well, that's moving. I think the message here is we're all going to even have to move to Denmark from Mongolia if we want to have taxes. Anyways, I am going to just stop by saying thank God for 3 institutions that are so important to preserving our liberty. One is the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I hope that you all read our pages regularly. John and I thank you for your support of that. Second of all is Fox News. How many of you watch Fox News pretty regularly? And third is the National Taxpayers Unions. I think you are the 3 pillars of freedom and liberty in this country. And I'm, again, once and for all, I am so honored to receive this award, and it means a lot to me, especially now that I've learned that Duane Parde has told me that Dave was the one who really was the inspiration for this. So thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here.